Now, one of the most common places where racism is experienced on a daily basis is the workplace. And we're joined now by two people who deal with this kind of issue regularly, Jose George and Shamishka Singh, who are both directors at one of South Africa's leading law firms, Cliff Decker Hofmeyr. Welcome to The Lot.
Hi, Thank guys.
You, Ryan. Yeah. So what is the difference between racism and discrimination?
Racism is a form of discrimination. Discrimination is legislated in terms of the Employment Equity Act. But racism really is a form of prejudice and intolerance based on the belief that races are different. So some people believe their race is superior and others are inferior. And there's prejudice perpetuated against somebody else based on their skin color, for example.
Right. So is there a difference between that and preference? So, I mean, this is a slight divergent of the question, so please ignore it if it is. But to understand, people's like, I'm preferential towards, in terms of what I date and what I find attractive. Is there a difference between preferential treatment for your own personal beliefs, like what I prefer, and what I act on as believing my race to be superior?
No, I think that's fine if you have a preference, as long as you're not going to discriminate against somebody else because of their skin color, as long as you don't infringe on their dignity. I don't think it would go as far as racism.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's simply a preference.
Right. And what are the different ways that racism manifests itself in the workplace?
So racism is racism, whether it's in the general public arena or if it's in the workplace. And there are different forms, so either it is in the form of unfair discrimination, and there are legislative measures put in place, such as the Employment Equity Act, or it could be a form of misconduct where an employee makes derogatory statements either against co-employees, the employer, or even just in a general form. So that would be seen as a form of misconduct for which an employee can be disciplined and in most cases dismissed, depending on the severity of the misconduct.
Okay. People obviously, like I'm asking myself this question, I'm sure you at home are asking very similar questions about this, is, you know, what happens if, like, I'm trying to decide whether my boss or somebody that I work with is being racist or not. I don't know where those lines are drawn. I don't know what the consequences are. I don't know all of that information. I'm trying to discern and distill for myself, like, what is racist and what's just me being offended by day-to-day activity. So let's get down to the nitty-gritties. What is constituted as a racist comment in a workplace?
So using slogans such as the K word or general forms of racist comments against a particular group, and if you either post it on social media or make those comments directed at your co-employees or the employer, there are instances and cases where emails would be sent and, you know, accusing persons of being racist without any substantiation. So it could be in the form of calling out somebody to be a racist, and that our courts have found is in fact in itself racist as well. So if you have no substantiation, and this is your only response or reaction to somebody perhaps trying to manage you, and you call them out to be racist, and you have no substantiation, and that in itself our courts have held is an offence as
so
racist.
So versus it says, like, actually, you're the racist.
So I think what Sam's dealing with is the kind of overt racism, and that's easy and quite, you know, you have a disciplinary inquiry, you investigate the allegations. If it's been proved, generally, you know, it results in a dismissal. I think what's more difficult is the insidious forms of racism.
Right.
You know, I won't sit with you in the canteen because of your skin color. You know, how do you deal with that?
And how do you detect it?
Know, can I have a disciplinary inquiry because you won't sit with me?
So well, what's the answer?
Well, I think the answer is the employer needs to educate the workplace. You know, and your workplace really should reflect what you want your society to look like. So try and integrate your workplace, try and get people to understand each other.
So it's also useful if there are policies in place. Most companies also take a zero-tolerance approach to racism in the workplace or inappropriate behavior. That's also useful to implement, but it's not sufficient to only just have the policy. You need to make people aware of it, train them, like Jose said, you know, awareness training, sensitivity coaching perhaps. But as an employee, if you feel you've been affected, at least bring it to the attention of your employer or someone superior. I mean, there are provisions in our legislation where in some cases of discrimination, employers can be taken to task and penalties imposed if they don't take action. but how can they take that action if they're not informed?
Yeah.
And then the next step would be for the employer to actually investigate these comments, find out if there's any merit to the complaint, and then implement the necessary disciplinary action, because you must also give the employee or the perpetrator an opportunity to explain themselves, because adverse action can be taken and it could lead to dismissal.
Once the employee has perhaps spoken to their employer and brought it to their attention and still nothing is done or it's ignored, what can the employee do next?
Well, just before we get to that point, the Employment Equity Act actually places obligations on the employer. So if the employer doesn't actually do anything, so let's say, for example, an employee says something racist in the workplace.
Yeah, like Danilo says to me all the time.
You never don't even say these
I'm teasing.
That's still on a national platform. Sure. Imagine, Imagine.
Danilo's taking my business card. He's going to speak. So the employer is obliged to do something about that and to try and eliminate whatever the discrimination is. If the employer doesn't, that employee can actually take action against the employer, and penalties can be imposed against the employer. So, sorry, just come back to your question. I lost the track.
That if the employer doesn't do anything about the complaint,
what happens? How
can it be escalated?
So there are two levels. Either you want to address the complaint against the person who perpetrated the misconduct. If there's a union involved, you can get the union involved. So you say the employer hasn't taken any action.
Yes.
You can go to the CCMA. The CCMA will deal with discrimination matters now. That's if you're under the threshold. So the minister's imposed something called an earnings threshold. Used to be before you could only go to the labour court. Obviously there's an access to justice kind of situation there. So now you can go straight to the CCMA if you earn under 205,000 rand a year.
Sure, interesting. This conversation is honestly going to get a lot of you on the edge of your seats, and I'm pretty sure you have lots of questions and comments. Don't worry, the conversation will continue after these.
Welcome back to Afternoon Express, live on SABC3. We're talking social media and racism.
Indeed. What an interesting topic to unfold, and I'm pretty sure all of you at home are very excited to have this conversation with us. We welcome back our guests to our loft and onto the couch. So let's move our attention then to social media. I mean, we've always seen, you know, the Penny Sparrow case made a whole bunch of trending comments online, and that had to do with a whole bunch of social media comments that she made about a racial slur, which had a whole bunch of adverse reactions too. Let's talk a bit about this post and what happened there. That is the Penny Sparrow case. I mean, so, you know, like posting something online that is racist, what implications can that have on my career as a whole?
Okay, so whether or not to make racist comments, if you make a comment on social media, your employer is able to take action and discipline you. If it affects the employment relationship, so if it has an impact on breaking down the employment relationship, you can take steps against your employees for those comments. More so and more serious are those of racist behavior or derogatory, inappropriate language. In the Penny Sparrow case, she was no longer employed by the specific agency, but they did receive a lot of bad reputation because it was the branding that was also doing the rounds on social media and in the print media as well, and they were aligned to these comments. And that's why there's the further steps taken by employers to protect their brands, because employees are seen to be brand ambassadors of their employers.
Right.
So you have to be very careful about what you say on social media. You know, once something's posted online, there's no turning back, and it can have negative repercussions, not just on your personal capacity, but your status in your employment as well, and the brand of your employer.
Absolutely.
So more and more we see cases in our CCMA, tribunals, the labour courts, even matters going up to the Constitutional Court, dealing with racist conduct on social media and how this has impacted on the employment relationship. And our courts are taking a very stern approach and have indicated that they will not tolerate this behaviour.
We're also finding that people don't understand the implication of retweeting a comment or liking it.
So you might not be the original author, but unless you have some form of disclaimer, and most people don't think about this, they're very ready to hit post or tweet or share, but you align yourself with the thoughts or the opinions of the original author. So if you've shared posts like these of Penny Sparrow or many others that have hit the spotlight, and you don't say, you know, this is bad, this should not be condoned, I dissociate myself with it, and you just share it, it could be misconstrued as if you are agreeing with the comments by the original author.
So, yeah, you've seen that example recently, one of our political parties, who we won't name,
Yes.
and the person going through a disciplinary inquiry for retweeting something. So she didn't make any comment about the tweet, but just by retweeting it, she aligned herself with that sentiment.
So, excuse my ignorance here, so I'm going to go straight for the jugular, because it's one thing that I want to understand as myself personally. I mean, I'm always on social media, being in the public eye all the time. We're speaking quite a lot about the obvious cases of racism, where I make a racial slur or I say something that is very blatantly, obviously racist. What about the ignorance? What about the ignorant comments? What about the more subtleties when it comes to racism, which we're undercurrents of, you know, of racism that we're not even understanding? I don't even understand half the times. A lot of people come back and be like, how could you say that? And I was like, oh, I didn't actually realize that was a negative thing at all. What happens to the ignorance side of things, the grey area?
In the workplace, I mean, the test that the courts apply is they'll look at what was actually said. So you look at the context, what was said in the context that it was said in, and they'll determine then, was that racist. So there's an example, swart man, for example, well, it can be a neutral term. It can also be quite a loaded term depending on the context. So the courts will look at that, the context in which the comment was made, and then they'll also apply an objective test. So it's not, does my comment offend you, but is my comment within the context that it was said actually objectively racist, as an example.
Sure.
Also, the thing is, intent plays quite a large part. So if I just said something innocently and I didn't mean to offend you, you know, there may be some leeway for me to not be dismissed if I'm an employee.
Sure.
I think it's also, you know, there isn't one confined list of words that are derogatory
that
or racist in nature, and everyone should stick to that list, because it, you know, can be words that are arbitrarily used, but the way
intentionality is also a big part of it. The courts always look at intentionality, and I know that that's a big part of it. So I don't know how you're feeling at home. I don't know, maybe you're one of those people who are feeling like, perhaps I could have said something racist, perhaps I need to relook at myself, perhaps you're one of those people who are experiencing this, and I hope you're going to take the right forms of action, because the courts are behind you. Companies should be behind you. Take action and do not allow this to happen in your workplace ever, ever again.